blood glucose lowering medication known as Diabex. In 2011, 3.2 million scripts. How can we account for these numbers? What's happening? Something seriously has gone wrong. Heart disease remains our biggest killer, 3.5 million of us. 70% of the population has got a long-term cardiovascular disease. It's our biggest killer, and in 04-05 it cost us $6 billion. Right? These are serious problems. Dementia. Dementia is a progressive brain disorder, a neurodegenerative brain disorder in which an individual loses their cognitive functioning, their memory, their personality. It's very sad. People become like infants. They can't go to the toilet. They lose functioning over their bowels. They forget their families. They need full-time care. This is becoming more and more common in our elderly people. There's about 300,000 Australians with dementia. Almost 10% of Australians aged over 65 have dementia. It goes to 30% for those aged 85. Now that's not normal. This isn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not plan that when you're 80 you get dementia. That is not normal. If that's the idea you have, that when you're old you lose your memory, that's actually false. Your brain is designed to remain very sharp well into your 9th decade of life, if you make it to there, inshallah. The number is expected to, people is expected to triple with dementia by 2050. It's the 3rd leading cause of death. And the number of Australians with dementia jumped by 21% between 05 and 2011. So I hope I'm showing you how big this issue is. This is an issue which affects us, family, friends, community. It's leading to destruction, it's ravaging us, it's shortening our lives. We're losing too many members of the community. So the question is, are they linked? Because if you're a type 2 diabetic, you've got a 40% increased risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia. Alzheimer's dementia being that dementia which attacks your higher level cognitive abilities, your memory, your ability to recall and retain information. You have almost 140% increased chance of developing vascular dementia, which is the dementia which attacks the wiring of the brain, what's called the white matter, the connections that allow information to travel from neuron to neuron. Who knew that diabetics have a massively increased risk and rate of developing dementia? Put up your hand. Who knew that? One person. 75% of people with diabetes die from heart disease. 3/4. You know that being overweight or obese is a risk factor. So a scientific question to ask is there a common factor? Instead of treating these as separate diseases, are they really the same manifestation of one biological process? Is there a common factor driving these epidemics? Am I going too fast? Are you with me?
Fine.
Okay. Now, if it wasn't bad enough, if you take diabetes, heart disease, these are the disorders that we are seeing more and more of in our community, which are associated with them. Infertility has become a huge issue. A condition called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is affecting many of our young women, low sperm count in men, cancer, vision loss, macular degeneration, fatty liver disease. Every second person I talked to said, my doctor told me I've got a fatty liver. Arthritis, psychological disorders are all associated with these conditions. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, dementia. So the net result is loss of life, human misery, suffering. We need to educate ourselves. So what are the answers we're given? Health authorities tell us that obesity is a disorder caused by an energy imbalance. Who's heard of that term, an energy imbalance? In other words, if you're obese, the reason why you're obese is you take too many calories in and you don't burn enough calories. There is an energy imbalance. Seems sensible, right? In other words, if you're obese, you're eating too much. You need stronger willpower. You have to readdress the energy imbalance. You've got to eat less and exercise more. Who thinks that sounds pretty logical? Put up your hands. That's what's happening in obesity.
Yeah.
Yeah? That's what's happening? Okay, you'll actually be surprised. If we look at the prevalence of obesity in Australia, 25 to 64-year-olds, as you can see, in 1980 it was pretty stable, hovering around 5 to 10% for men and women. Starting from the mid-80s, there is the first signs of a jump in obesity, And in 1989 and early 90s, it skyrockets. Can you see that? Obesity skyrockets in the late 80s, early 90s, and really has continued unabated. There's been a little drop in 99, 2000, but it's continuing. So the prevalence of diabetes, as you can see, from 1980, if you can look there for ladies, was about, I make that about 6%. 2008, it's hovering around over 20%. Quadrupled. Almost. What's happened? What happened in 1989 that all of us started becoming overweight and obese? Right? These demand answers. This is the rate of obesity in America in 1989. As you can see, in most states, relatively stable, just like Australia, anywhere from 0 to 10%. You ready for the shock of your life? 2010. Every single state has an obesity rate above 20%. Many above 30%. What happened in 20 years? Did genetics change? Did we all just become gluttons and can't help ourselves? We're eating too much Doritos and ice cream? What happened? What's the answer? What's the scientific answer?
The food available is not... The food that's available to us is
not
destroying us.
In 20 years? Okay, we'll seek to answer the question. What happened in the early 80s, late 90s? Well, three things happened. 1988, the US Surgeon General. US Surgeon General is like the Chief Medical Officer of Australia. It's a medical doctor, a public servant employed by the government who issues a report every year about the nation's health priorities. In 1988, the Surgeon General in the US said that the dietary priority for Americans is to reduce the intake of dietary fat to protect them against heart disease. So there was a message given to the public: reduce your intake of fat. Fat is bad. Clogs your arteries. Who's heard that? Cholesterol. Right? Number two, in 1992, the US Department of Agriculture introduced the food pyramid. Who's seen the food pyramid?
Yeah.
I saw it when I was in primary school. It was on the wall. And third, of course, our wonderful Australian government implemented the exact same nutritional advice, following their American cousins. Now, who remembers the food pyramid? What was at the base of the food pyramid? No family members.
The fruits and vegetables.
Fruits and veggies, close.
That was inside some bread and cereal.
Carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates. So this, remember, the obesity epidemic takes off at the time that this is introduced. We were told, see the top, fats, oils and sweets, limit your intake of fat. Even animal protein is sort of limited. 6 to 11 servings of carbohydrates. So they want us to eat bread and rice and pasta as our main sources of nutrition. Right? Okay, so save that picture in your mind, the food pyramid. Is obesity really a disorder of excess calories? Is that what's causing obesity, that you eat too much? To say that obesity is a disorder of excess calories tells us nothing about the biology of obesity. Overeating is a behavioral symptom of obesity. It is not a biological mechanism. It's like if I told you, you are constipated because you don't go to the toilet. Or you have a fever because your temperature is high. Have I really explained why you've got a fever, or why you're constipated? Circular reasoning, right? Obesity is not a disorder of excess calories. The biological mechanism is obesity is a disorder of excess fat accumulation. It's your fat cells in turbocharged fat storage mode. It's abundant, excessive growth of fat cells. And a lot of fat is coming into your fat cells. And when you consume a lot of calories, that's a consequence of your fat cells being dysregulated. Do we get that? Obesity is a disorder of excess fat accumulation. And as a result of that, you eat more. Eating more is not the cause of obesity, it's a consequence. So the question becomes, what regulates fat storage? What regulates the growth of your fat cells, your adipose tissue? I'd like a young person to maybe try and answer that question.